Fabricana. Today we're going to show you how to make a lovely decorative pillow like this. This one has a wonderful flange detail. That detail allows you to really customize the colors that you want in your pillow and pull a whole room together. We divided this project into two parts. In the first part we're going to be making the pattern and cutting out our fabric, and in the second part we will be constructing the pillow. Having an accurate pattern and a plan for cutting out your fabric are important parts of any sewing project. Hopefully the techniques and tips shown here today will help you find success with other projects as well. So let's get started. We're going to be using a pattern paper that's marked with 1-inch grid marks. There's other things you can use, such as these Pellon tracing cloth. This one is marked with red dots in a 1-inch grid. And there's also this one that's marked with a blue grid that's maybe easier to see. These fabrics are a good choice if you're planning on using your pattern more than once, as they're a little bit more durable than the paper. For this project we've chosen to use this nice feather pillow. It's a little bit longer than it is wide. And before we get started making the pattern, we need to find out the precise measurements. So for the length, we're going to measure right from one of the seams at the end across the length of the pillow to the other seam. For this project, it's 20 inches, so you want to make a note of that. And then for the width, again, we're going to go from one of the seams across the width of the pillow to the other seam, which is 13 inches. You don't want to pull the tape measure too tight because your pillowcase would be too tight. It's better to start with a little bit looser fit, and if you find you want a little bit tighter, you can always take it in a little bit. Otherwise, if you cut your fabric too small, it will be wasted. So now that we have our measurements, we're going to start making our pattern. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a line along our markings for the width of the pillow, which is 13 inches. So I'm going to count out the 13 inches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, and draw my length there. And then it's 20 inches across, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And draw the length of the pillow. Draw the other side. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. And finally, the other side. Now the way we're going to be sewing this pillow, we're going to just be sewing the 3 sides. This other line will be a fold, so let's mark it here that it's a fold. The next thing we need to do is add our seam allowances to the 3 sides that are going to be sewn. So for the ends, we're going to add an extra 1/2 inch to the seam allowances at each end. And for the long side, we're actually going to add 3/4 of an inch, and that gives us the option of putting in a zipper. So now that we've mapped out the main parts of our pattern, we're going to actually fold the paper along the fold line that we'll have in our pillow. This way we don't have to draft the whole pattern. We can just use the lines that we've already drawn to create the other side of the pillow. I'm going to use some handy little weights here to hold the pattern pieces in place. So once I remove the weights, I can open out my pattern piece, and now I know I've got the perfect pattern to fit my pillow with the right seam allowances included. And I can take this with me actually to the fabric store in order to calculate the exact amount of fabric that I need for my pillows. Before we can move on to cutting out our fabric, we also have to keep in mind that we need a pattern for the flange. Now the flange is going to be running along the short edge of the pillow, which as you recall was 13 inches for our pillow. So we're going to draw the pattern for the flange, 13 inches long. Now our flange is going to be finished 3/4 of an inch. So we need to double that because the flange is folded in half. So 3/4 times 2 is 1.5. So the pattern so far doesn't include any seam allowances. So we want to add a 1/2 inch all the way around. Because when we sew for home decor projects, we generally use 1/2 inch seam allowances, unless you need to put in a zipper like I mentioned earlier. There we go. If you'd like to remind yourself that you're going to be folding the flange, you can always put a dotted mark right down the middle of your pattern piece to indicate the fold line. So once we had our pattern finished, we took it to the fabric store and we found this beautiful kind of linen look print. Now keep in mind, there's definitely a one-way direction to this print. All of the flowers are growing in an upwards motion. So you got to think about how your print is going to translate to your pillow. Because we're doing our pillow all in one piece, keep in mind that when you fold it, the front of the pillow will be up and down and the back will be the other way. That's okay for our project. We'll just keep the upside down side to the back. But if you're working with a print that is maybe directional the other way, you really have to think about which way you're going to place your pattern. So now we're actually going to cut out our fabric. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to cut our fabric single layer because we're just going to make one. But if you wanted to make two of the same pillow, you could just fold your fabric in half and cut out two pillows at the same time. So the big things to keep in mind here are the grain line of the fabric. Of course, the grain runs parallel to the selvage of the fabric. And remember, with our print, we want it to be going up and down across the width of our pillow. So I've got my weights again. I'm just going to use those to hold the pattern in place. Another thing to think about is if there's a special motif that you want centered on your pillow, now's the time to shift your pattern piece to include those pictures. So I've got this lovely butterfly here. So I'm actually going to move my pattern down just a little bit to make sure that that's going to be featured right at the focus of the pillow. So this is the fabric that we've chosen for the flange. To give you an idea what it's going to look like when it's finished, let's just kind of fold it in half here and place our cut pillow piece here. So you can start to get the idea of what the finished flange is going to look like and coordinated with the pillow. So we've got our pattern piece here, and of course we were putting the flange at the two ends of the pillow. So I'm going to fold my fabric in half. Actually, I'm going to fold it with the pattern facing out because I actually want to center the piece so that none of the stripes are kind of cut right in half. So I'm kind of lining up the ends with this stripe here, and that'll give a balanced look to the flange once it's cut. So now we've got all of our pattern pieces cut out for one pillow. We've got the actual main part of the fabric doubled up, front and back. And we've got the two flange pieces, which are going to go at each end of the pillow. We can kind of start to see the finished effect. Now we've created our pattern and cut out our fabric. Tune in for part 2 when we sew it up.